Nicky, thank you so much for your perseverance in managing to get to an episode of The Responsible Edge. For our listeners, you won't be aware, but Nicky's been through so many trials and tribulations, IT-wise, to enable herself to get onto The Responsible Edge today. It's so great to have you on, Nicky. Thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. It's great to be here, Charlie. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with the IT New Year gremlins.
I was brilliant. Between the two of us, I don't know how much sort of higher education you and I have got between us, but we only just managed it, but we managed it nonetheless.
This IT support is needed for, hey? I need personal live-in IT support would be fantastic.
Maybe we do a shout out at the end for any help that anybody can recommend. Nicky, I know that we're not going to be able to do justice to this in 20 minutes, but really keen to obviously introduce you to our listeners and give them a flavour of you and your background and the all variously interesting things that you've done throughout your career and, you know, what your goals and intentions are for the rest of it. So start wherever you would like to, and just give our listeners a flavour of you, and particularly through the lens of the role that corporate ethics, responsibility and sustainability has played.
Of course. Thank you, Charlie. Yes, so I guess my journey began in Brandside. So I worked for some very entrepreneurial companies right from the beginning, straight out of uni. I actually worked at the Carphone Warehouse very closely with Charles Dunstan, who is a fantastic entrepreneur, and learned so much from sitting with him and his teams in the Carphone Warehouse about European expansion and how to run businesses and how to work very fast and in a very, very agile way. And then I went off into the world of advertising. And it was really interesting for me to work on particularly some of the pro bono projects that we were doing there. I worked within McCann Erickson, one of the world's leading advertising agencies. And it was some of the pro bono projects that we did there. We did something particularly with a project with an organisation called Peace One Day. Fantastic guy, Jeremy Gilly, who was running that and had launched Peace One Day. And I think when I look back, that was the moment that things changed for me, and I realised the power of business for good, and I realised the power of leveraging brands and businesses' power and engagement and audience to do good in the world. And that was really the moment that I shifted, and I learned, frankly, as a young person, I was in my early 20s then, the power that business for good can have in the world. So from that point on, I was pretty much determined to focus my career solely into that space, and have gone on to do that. Along the way, it's been very interesting. I've had lots of twists and turns in different directions. Recently, I've studied with University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. I completed, and I'm one of their Women Leading Change alumni, went through that program with those guys, which was fantastically inspirational. And through that, I met some incredible women doing some really fantastic work around the world on environmental justice, social justice, corporate responsibility. So again, that kind of fueled my progress in this space and got the cogs whirring again about all the different things that I could be doing to make a positive impact in the world. And then I guess I've been NGO side now for, maybe about 8 years, working for the RSPB, working alongside WWF, National Trust, on some David Attenborough, behind the scenes of the David Attenborough documentary, Wild Isles, engaging on the corporate social responsibility side of that campaign as well, thinking about nature and conservation. So really along the way in my career, across the 20 years now, is I'm shocked to say that I've been doing this. My career's kind of edged me ever so more closely towards nature and conservation over the last decade. And I've really been focused in the nature space now for a good decade or so, supporting nature and conservation projects.
And Nicky, again, brilliantly introduced. I'm not going to do service to how you've just described this, but being in your early 20s and I says having that first sort of awakening, if you like, of business for good, like this is something that's clearly, you're really passionate about at that point, and you decide, no, this is what I want to spend the rest of my career doing.
Yeah.
Just talk us through that point at which nature and conservation and biodiversity became sort of, if you like, the next subset that really inspired you. Like, was there a particular moment? Was there a particular organization you're working for, a particular piece of work, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Good question. I guess nature has always been a huge passion of mine. I mean, it's been pivotal for me personally. The power of nature and the power of spending time in nature is so powerful for people from a mental health perspective. It's been really integral for me throughout my life, in periods of very busy periods, burnout periods and all sorts of personal life issues. It's been very, very important. But I think the pivotal moment that I really delved fully into the nature space was when I went to the RSPB and headed up their corporate partnerships team there. And one of the really exciting projects that we worked on there that was a very memorable moment for me was I was leading a team that ran a campaign called Let Nature Sing, which was basically a UK-wide campaign. We engaged with, I think it was 5 million people on one day, bringing the sound of birdsong into unusual environments. So it was played in cathedrals up and down the country, train stations up and down the country, school buses. We brought the sound of birdsong to people. With the campaign aim was to let them know and to remind people how powerful nature can be for them. Because when people care about something, they want to save it and they want to support it. So reminding people how much they love nature was really important for us with Let Nature Sing. And another thing we did as part of that campaign is we launched a single of pure birdsong into the UK charts, which was hilariously fun and fantastically fun. And we got to, I think it was number 11 in the UK charts. And wow. The funniest part of it was Nick Grimshaw announcing on the UK chart countdown, this is a single of pure birdsong. I don't know what it's doing here, but here we are. And we made it to number 11 in the charts. Ew. And we were even remixed by Diplo, Charlie.
Oh, wow.
So we had a pure birdsong remixed by Diplo in the charts. So I suppose that was really the moment that I deeply understood the power that nature held within people's emotions and how emotively connected people are to nature. Mm-hmm. And even the vox pops of people hearing birdsong in train stations on their way to work that morning. And we had little pieces to camera of people up and down the country from Glasgow all the way down to King's Cross and the Southwest, etc., of people saying, wow, this is amazing. It's just changed my whole day that I'm hearing birdsong here in the train station this morning. And it just allowed them to step outside of the rat race and just remember what really matters. Mm-hmm. And it just really hit home to me within that campaign of how much nature does really matter to people. Mm-hmm. So that just buoyed me along, I guess. And ever since then, I've been focused entirely on nature conservation. I've worked to launch or to do the funding and the commercial behind the launch of the world's largest marine protection zone. I've worked on Amazon rainforest restoration. I've worked on peatland restoration. I've worked on tons of things all around the world, globally, European and UK wide, all on nature and planetary conservation, basically. And it's been a fantastically exciting journey so far.
and Nicky, and we'll come on to talk about the future plans in a second, but it sounds like it's been, everything you've worked through the prism of nature and conservation and biodiversity, but it sounds like you've done a mirage of different roles and different activities, from obviously work starting in a comms capacity, but it sounds like you have done multiple different things. How has that been, sort of, developing skills in multiple different areas? Have you enjoyed the process?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically what I've done is applied my skills and my natural, I suppose, the way I naturally am, which is I enjoy pitching. I enjoy new business. Basically, I'm a new business person for nature and for the environment. I often refer to myself as I pitch for the planet, is how I talk about myself. So I go into rooms and I try to convince brands and leaders and decision makers to make better decisions in the interests of nature and the planet. So yeah, if I had to describe what I do, I guess, as I say, I pitch for the planet, and I enjoy doing that. I love nothing more than a Dragon's Den style environment. That's where I'm most at home, pitching and convincing people, Charlie, and selling a vision and selling an idea. That's my thing.
Which, Nicky, I think I can speak for. I've obviously met you a couple of times now, but I can speak on behalf of our listeners and say I think you can clearly see how natural that comes to you, because it's a fairly infectious way that you introduce these things. Let me just ask you. You started. You mentioned, you described how, in those early years, in your early 20s, you were working, for an agency who was looking to engage with some of these third party kind of philanthropic social impact initiatives. What did you learn about your experience of being on that side that you then have applied to, for coming at it from the other perspective and presenting some of these NGOs and opportunities for impact to businesses?
I think that's a really great point. Having been on both sides of the fence, I think is really helpful. Because I'm able, from the NGO perspective, I'm able to really understand what the brands are trying to get out of it. And quite often when you're trying to partner between private and public sector, it's a very interesting relationship to try to navigate. There's often you've got to look for shared value and alignment in terms of impact goals. But the challenges that often come up is that, there's different types of organizations are working at incredibly different paces. And I often describe it to teams that I'm leading in the sense of it's like trying to jump on a train that's going at a hyperspeed train. And when you're the NGO, you're not used to traveling and operating at this pace that the brands and the agencies will. And actually, that's no reflection either way. I'm not judging anybody for going faster or slower. That just quite often is the way that things will function. So it's very important to have somebody within these within the NGO side to have an understanding of how the private sector works and how these commercial relationships work, because you are needing to jump onto a very, very fast train, and to be working alongside them and understanding their set of priorities and the way things operate within these different contexts. So having somebody that has that experience of both sides of the fence, I think, is really important. So quite often when I've led teams and built teams, I am looking for people quite often with that private sector experience, which opens up a really lovely opportunity for people who might have a career within brand side or agency side and want to flip over to do something a bit more NGO side, or maybe really focus on the impact-led side of things. There's a real opportunity there for them to bring their skills over to NGO side and to the public sector side, because it's very much needed. So I would just put that little call out to anybody who's interested in pulling over. There's tons of opportunity. So yeah, please do look.
And Nicky, you mentioned skills in that context. What about attitude and intent? Like, what's it like? I mean, again, from my very ill-informed view or perspective, you would imagine that if people have got experience of the private sector side, and they've then perhaps had a similar experience to yourself, where they found themselves being really inspired to actually enact that thing that we all talk about impact. And it really is practicing what you preach, to say, well, look, I'm probably going to forego some of the commercial benefits of staying in the private sector to go and do, to I hate you, I don't know if this is a good phrase to use, but to live authentically, if you like, in terms of those values and going and doing something different. So just touch upon that. Like, what does that do to the attitudes of the people that you've worked with?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic space to be working in, because you'll often find, exactly as you say, people have often made, I don't want to say the word sacrifices, but they've made shifts in their lifestyle quite often. So certainly historically, when I did it, 9 years ago, it required an attitudinal shift and a lifestyle shift. Because at that point, it was a little bit more niche to go into the impact space. Now, thankfully, 2025, we've got private sector impact-led businesses popping up all over the place, lots of people working and lots of people wanting to move into accelerating the green economy and really having some deep purpose-led impact. And that's fantastic. back in the day when I did it, it was, as I say, a little bit more niche, and it did require a different shift. I just think overall, in terms of attitude, and for me, it's very important to be looking for the positives. I can't help myself. I'm a glass half full type of person. So, but always looking for the opportunity. When it comes to sustainability and nature, we are in a context where nature has been significantly depleted. In my lifetime, I think we've lost almost 70% of wildlife species in the UK alone, for example. So you can absolutely look at the glass half empty version, and you can look at the depletion, and you can look at the decline, and you can look at the risks and things that need to be mitigated. For me, I try to come at things from an opportunity perspective. So we are where we are. What is the opportunity? How can we innovate? How can we experiment? How can we design? How can we come up with new campaigns that can really shift the dial and really excite people and really bring people with us from an emotional perspective? And that's, for me, the beauty and the power of nature as a lens through which to view all of this stuff. You start to speak about things from a nature perspective, it immediately conjures up memories of kicking through the leaves in your wellies when you were 5, and running around in the woods and making dens in the woods and running around on the beach. And people have a very emotional response to talking about nature. And then you're in their hearts. You're in their hearts and their minds. And then you can say, so now we need to do something about this, and we need to protect this so that for future generations, we can allow the future generations to kick around in the leaves in their wellies. It's not just something that we had in the past. It's something that the next generations can also experience.
Nikki, I love that. I absolutely love that. I think, like, I was speaking to somebody recently, and we were talking about the kind of for the vast majority of people, the incredibly abstract nature of carbon. What does this mean? Like, what is it? What is it? How can you formulate that into something that is digestible and inspiring and affects change in the individual? And it's so difficult. And I think you've just nailed it, which is, we need to think about experiences of wildlife, experiences of nature as being the catalyst, if you like, for winning those hearts, winning those minds, and then enacting change, which both supports biodiversity and and issues around conservation, but equally will have a knock-on impact in terms of approaches to decarbonisation, etc. So
decarbonisation, exactly, Charlie. I agree with you completely. If you go in and say to an individual or even at a business level, we need to have a decarbonisation strategy. We need to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to think about sequestration. We need to think we can do all of this and we can have all these conversations. But actually, I personally like to have a huge storytelling element to what we're talking about, because storytelling is the way that we bring people with us. humans communicate and have always communicated for 250,000 years, at passing on knowledge from generation to generation via the power of stories. And for me, the storytelling is vital. And working in conservation has been very, very interesting, because you work with incredibly smart scientific people who have all of the knowledge in the world about these topics. And I find that the role I can play and people like me can play, it's almost like a translation role. It's almost like a translating the science through stories into ways that connect with people and then can make a real difference. I worked on a peatland restoration project at the RSPB in partnership with Co-op, for example. And that was all around peatland restoration, carbon sequestration, some quite sciencey topics. But when you want to communicate that to individuals and to communities, yes, you can have that on the website. You can have all of the science listed, but really we just need to talk about the fact that we're restoring habitat at a landscape scale to protect nature. We're protecting nature for future generations. That's what we're doing. So there's a legacy aspect to all of this work as well, Charlie, which I love, which makes me very happy to think that I'm working to support future generations experiencing nature in the way that I did as a young person. So yeah, that's really important to me.
Nicky, that's absolutely brilliant, because my next question was going to be what would you like to be able to say about your career at the end of your career? Would you like to be able to say about what you've done? And it seems to me that you've kind of answered that directly there, which is and beautifully so.
Well, I'm just starting, Charlie. I would say I'm only. This is the irony. There's so much to be done. I describe where I am as literally just the start. This is just the start of the work that needs to be done. And 2025 for me is a really huge year in really doubling down on the amount of impact that I can have, and the ripples. I'm always talking about ripples. The ripples of impact that the work I do can produce and deliver through the businesses that I work with, through the organizations that I work with. So yeah, this is just the beginning, Charlie. Lots of watch the space.
Indeed. And just before, I want to play a slight devil's advocate. I don't want to move the conversation away from the kind of the positive frame that you provided us with, but I'm just going to play devil's advocate. There was a podcast show I did yesterday where we were talking about, we've known about these problems for so long, and we've known about the fact that we need urgent, radical change for so long.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've had lots of great storytelling, perhaps, for so long, and yet the dial is not shifting how it needs to, and we are not seeing those kind of radical transformations. Is it too simple to say, Nicky, that from a story perspective, that we just haven't told the right story yet? Or is there something fundamental and underlying in the way that our systems work that means that no matter how good the story is that we can tell, ultimately systemic change is the only thing that's really going to enable us to move forward here? Like, just touch on that. And I'm sorry for being the bearer of, or to throw the sort of the alternative view in.
No, absolutely. You're entirely right. And my most recent role was working within a systems change organization, because you're absolutely right. Systemic change is utterly required. We can't just go in and do what people might think of the fluffy stuff and tell stories and expect things to change. It's got to be both top down and bottom up, and from both angles as well, actually. We've got to really come at this issue from multiple angles. The system has really not been conducive to change until now. And the legislative environment that we operate within as businesses and as a society actually has not been conducive to the positive change that we're wanting to see. And still isn't actually. We need to accelerate this change as fast as possible. Governments, we all the COPs that happen, we never quite see enough legislative and policy level support that I think those of us on the ground would really hope for. But it's coming. And again, as I say, I'm an eternal optimist. And I think we operate within the context that we operate within. There's nothing we can do about that. We can influence and we can advocate. And I know lots of very, very clever, important people who are advocating at policy level for the system around us to shift. But the systems around us also respond, is actually thinking about this as in an organic way, in a nature-based way. The systems do respond to the people, the individuals within them. So actually, I think we also need to demonstrate through the power of stories that people care about this stuff. So the more people demonstrate that they care, which we can encourage via storytelling and emotive campaigns, that does ladder up to the policy level. Governments are looking and they are listening. They are listening. Do
you know what? You've nailed that in my mind, because I'll be honest, there's been a couple of times, your episode 76, Nicky, of the Responsible Ode. So we've done, that's been just over a year that we've been doing this. And, sometimes I question myself a little bit, because I kind of reflected on, like, what are we doing here? Are we providing real value in sort of highlighting these issues and continuing to have, conversations with people about, these problems at large and offering up suggested solutions? And there are times when, if you're feeling a little bit down in the dumps, you can think, we're just contributing to the overall sort of noise here, but is action actually occurring? But I think you're absolutely right that every conversation that's had about these issues just raises that profile even just a little bit,
even just a little bit,
cumulative impact of that could be significant. So
you don't know what it's actually so important, Charlie, what you're doing, because to celebrate successes is super important. To have these discussions is super important. And actually, even if our conversation sparks an idea somewhere, which it will, in somebody, to launch something, to do something new, to innovate in their existing business, to launch a new business. One of the things I'm doing is working with an Earthshot Prize nominated nature tech startup at the moment, for example. There's some people out there doing some really, really exciting things, and their ideas are being sparked by the collective attitude. And so we can work to shift the collective attitude. We can work to look at things through that more positive lens, and ideas can be sparked. And then we've got to really just look after and tend to those ideas and support those ideas to thrive. So yes, please do. Don't keep doing what you're doing, Charlie.
Here, Nicky, I feel totally inspired to keep going. Thank you for that. As expected, we've absolutely obliterated our 20 minutes talking about you, but I know we've touched on some other things. Would you mind, Nicky, possibly providing our listeners with a bit of a summary of the CISL article from October last year, just giving a flavour of what was in there, and then perhaps just picking out what were the most interesting points for you?
Absolutely, yes. So there's a fantastic report done by the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership called their Better Business Report. I'm just going to look at my notes. It's how can we rethink business models for nature positive outcomes? And I thought it was such a fantastically insightful report that they've put together there. It was desk-based research rather than case studies from businesses directly. But what they were thinking about is how can businesses transform the models within which they operate operationally and from a governance perspective to try to and to shift themselves towards a more nature positive way of operating. So nature positive as a concept is a very interesting one. It's something that was emergent in my time at the RSPB. So I did work with a lot of the policy and advocacy colleagues over at the RSPB at that point, to think about what does nature positive mean. And as you might suggest, as you might understand, I mean, it's about having a positive impact on nature rather than a depletion, basically, not taking from, but giving back to within a business's operation. So I guess we were looking at net zero as a concept and how successful the concept of net zero has been with businesses, because it's a tangible thing that people can understand. People can comprehend what is my impact, and I need to get that impact down to zero, as close to zero as I can. So we were trying to give a tangible description to nature and biodiversity. And instead of being nature zero, having zero impact on nature, we wanted that to have for businesses to understand that actually they can give back and have a regenerative positive impact on nature through their operation. So that report, for anybody that wants to look at it, I think we're going to link to it within the show notes here. It's very, very insightful. I'd recommend people go and take a look. It outlines lots of different archetypes of how businesses can structure their business model, and how they can set themselves up based on whether they're a service level business, service-based business, product-based. It refers to different types, different sectoral areas of business as well. So there's lots of different ways to come at it in terms of organizing and orchestrating yourself as a nature positive business. That was a really interesting report that I would recommend people go and delve into.
And Nicky, we will certainly be linking to it as you suggested. I think it's really, as you say, really interesting, really comprehensive in terms of introducing this idea of nature positivity. In terms of, I'm going to ask you, I need to come back to whatever. In fact, no, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit here. We'll probably edit this out. Before I ask you my next question, what did you pick out of that piece, of that research that to you was particularly compelling, particularly sort of inspiring, particularly sort of actionable, if you like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of pieces within that report that really resonated with me. I think I love a bigger picture. I'm a bigger picture person. And the bigger picture from that report that I took was that there's pretty much a whole scale transformation of the economy that is required. And I think we understand that. We talked just like before around the system within which we operate. We do need a whole scale transformation of the economy. Now, that isn't going to happen overnight. So actually, what I love about this report is that it outlines some strategies that business can take dependent on the different, as I say, the size, the type, the sector, whatever. It gives them some tangible, quite detailed blueprints, basically, for how they can transition towards that new model. Now, actually, I think one of the things that we need to think about, and people like me do, is to make sure that we're explaining to businesses around this transition to this new economy, to the new green economy. We have some businesses that are at different levels of maturity in terms of that thinking. We have businesses and brands that absolutely have that embedded already at the heart of their vision, their mission, their purpose. Nature's already in there. They're factoring that in. They're thinking about it. They're set up for the future and the future the future structure of the economy. There are others that are going to need a bit of convincing along this journey, and are a bit more reticent, let's say, to let go of the way that they have been operating. So that's going to be interesting for people like me who are at the front line of doing that convincing job. But sorry, go on.
Sorry, Nicky. Just on that, do you have concern, or do you have personal experience of the kind of, I'm going to call it like ESG apathy, if you like, that they're perhaps, we go through cycles, I know, but I feel like at the moment, talking to a few people, there is that, that comes with a lot of this stuff. And then obviously you just look at the kind of geopolitical climate, and you look at some of the situations that are occurring, and there's a lot of action being taken that is scary when it comes to the ESG agenda as a whole, if you like. How does nature fit into that? Like, are you experiencing that there is that just slight sense of that sigh, if you like, of, oh, here's another thing that we're being tasked with thinking about and doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is that collective sigh that I think we're all used to in this space, which is why I just go back to that optimism and positivity, because there is so many reporting requirements now, and businesses have been doing really well. They've got their ESG person, they've got their sustainability lead, and these people working in these sustainability roles within brands, I mean, I tip my hat to them, because it's an incredibly difficult role to be taking. The remit for those roles is so vast. There's so many different factors, from carbon to biodiversity to supply chain, scope 1, 2, 3, all the rest of it. So much.
And then look after people as well. Yeah, just throw people.
And then they often have to cover the social impact side of things as well. Sometimes the EDI side of things as well. I mean, it's bonkers how much these people are covering. So as I say, I tip my hat to them. But really what we need is for ESG to come out of that silo, with sitting within one person's remit, and to be really embedded across entire organizations. And then I think it becomes less of here's just another thing that somebody's asking me to do. This is actually a mindset. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching business through a different lens. It's the transformation of the economy that needs to happen is from one where we've approached business through the lens of, I suppose, ultimately GDP and profitability and margins and year-on-year growth and month-on-month growth and expansion and efficiencies and those sorts of words. And we need to flip the script towards regenerative models, impact and positivity rather than depletion. So what are we giving? What are we as a business giving to future generations rather than what can we take to maximize our profits as fast as we can?
And Nicky, on that, like, let's give our listeners like some practical examples of this. So, like, can you just take like it could be hypothetical, but like just take a typical business operating in a typical sector. And almost what I'd also really like is to an understanding of, like, presumably, as you mentioned with net zero, the starting point is to understand, well, what is our current impact on nature? Sure. And then almost like, what are the metrics at play with that? Like, what are the kind of, how is this analyzed? And then what would be a typical set of changes to the way that an organization operates to become more nature positive? Sorry, that's a very difficult question to answer, but just give us an example.
I've got you. No. That makes perfect sense. And it depends. There's not one size fits all, which is frustrating because I wish there were, because then it would be nice and simple to just replicate that. It does depend on the context within which the business operates and the scale of that business, actually. So an interesting conversation I'm having with somebody just in a couple of days is a woman who is running an impact-led product focused business. And she's very focused on nature and biodiversity in her business. She's a CEO of quite a well-known brand. But she's thinking, how can we really embed this into our purpose and mission rather than it just being something that we say we factor in? So exactly as you point out, Charlie, it's about thinking about right from the beginning, what is the impact that we're having on nature? Now, that can be through the supply chain, that can be within our community. That there's different layers. And again, I like to think of things as ripples. So I think there's different layers of ripple to address this at. So if we're starting from the core and then we're rippling out is often the way I suggest people do it. So starting at the core of the business, what is the impact that we have on nature and nature has on us? If we're a product-based business, one of the most fantastic brands that started to and had a voice of nature on their board was Faith in Nature, the beauty brand. And they've done a fantastic job of really embedding not just nature through the brand itself. It's not just a branding exercise. It's not just a peripheral branding exercise. They put nature on the board as a stakeholder, and they really deeply think about the impact they have on nature and the impact nature has on them, in the sense that they can't function without nature. And actually that's not just a one-off case study. There is no business without nature. There is no business on a dead planet. I know people love that sentence, but that's factual. We aren't going to have businesses, an economy, jobs, unless we look after the ecosystem within which we exist. And we recognize that we are part of that ecosystem. We're not other than nature. We are one with nature. This is me going into the hippie side of it for you for a moment, but my hippie side's coming out. But we are not separate to nature, Charlie. I think that the collective sigh that you talked about can come from as if it's somebody is asking me to do another thing. It's another task on my action list. It's another job to be done. But actually, if we flip that script and talk about, we are interwoven with nature. Without it, we don't exist and we can't function. So actually, it's not just another item on a to-do list. It's a vital and integral part of supporting the ecosystem within which we operate, the ecosystem within which our businesses operate, and the systems that support life itself and us and our future generations. It's having that sort of legacy mindset, I think, makes it feel a bit less, oh, here we go, there's another thing. It actually kind of really reinforces the importance of why this needs to happen.
Nicky, I'm bang on with you. I mean, I think it's so interesting though, isn't it? Because like how our systems are set up, where how many businesses, when it really boils down to it, how many businesses are sat there going, do you know what? We really need to think about legacy and we really need to think about the long term here. Like, I know there are, but the collective thinking is so short term, and it's so that actually, coming back to your point, really the compelling proposition for an organization to take their nature impact seriously right now within the structure in which we operate is a branding exercise. It might be that it can become authentically ingrained into all aspects of the organization, but it'd be fascinating to know how many organizations would invest significantly in becoming nature positive in terms of their function and operation without talking about it. I imagine there would be very few.
Well, why would you not want to talk about it? I guess thing. So it doesn't need to be, I suppose, given the premise of the Responsible Edge podcast and the anti-greenwash charge, I think it's very important for this not to be seen as a greenwash exercise. And I think greenwashing as a concept worries brands hugely. I mean, you know, we know that, we all know that, and it often then results in the green hushing, which we all know about. But actually, what we've got to do, this is again why I really love to encourage businesses to innovate and to experiment, because actually then you're not asking businesses to dive into the deep water of an unknown lake, for example. We're just asking them to come and dip their toe in gently. So what we're trying to say is, I go in and speak to leaders and board members and CEOs, and I encourage them to dip a toe into the water of embedding nature. So let's even just do this from an innovation perspective. Let's innovate in and do a pilot project and do something that allows us to weave nature in. Let's run it as an innovation project. Let's run it as an experiment. Let's work in partnership with other brands in this space and potentially some suppliers in your supply chain. Let's try this out. Let's dip a toe into this water and let's talk about it a lot. Let's tell everybody what we're doing. Let's work in the open. Let's be really open about this, and the successes that come from that and the challenges that come from that. Let's be open about that too. And let's be open about the fact that we're experimenting. And really, as far as I'm concerned, that's fantastic. If we can convince people to do that and to experiment into this area. I mean, I think it was Simon Sinek that said something beautiful around early adopters of a concept, emergent areas, as this is. It's an emergent area. The early adopters will happen. We'll get to that kind of tipping point, won't we, of around 15% adoption of this. And then we really will start to turn the dial, and lots of people will come with us. Until then, we are going to be talking to the early adopters and the outliers who have a passion for this. But that's okay, because those of us really passionate about it just need to be demonstrating, showcasing how fantastic this is, showcasing how customers and communities and people, citizens want this to happen. And then others will follow. You know, so yeah, coming at it from that experimental innovation lens is just allows it to be a bit of an easier entry point for people, I think, Charlie.
I love that, Nicky. Yeah, make it accessible, like reduce the barrier to experiment, if you like, and allow these organizations and these leaders to see the value in approaching things this way. Beautifully put, Nicky. We've only scratched the very surface on that article and piece, and as I say, we will link to it for others to follow up. But let's conclude now with the magic wand, this ever worn out magic wand that we're using. If you were to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
What a beautiful question. And so for me, what I would love businesses to do is to start to ask themselves the question, what would nature do? Because how would we think, feel, and do things differently if we make decisions based on coming at things from that nature lens and coming at things from that legacy lens? So I think that the magic wand for me would be to, when you're making business decisions, when you're planning a new startup, when you're reviewing your strategy for the next year, which a lot of people will be thinking about now-ish, just start to bake in the thought of what would nature do in this environment? What would nature want us to do? How could we behave as nature, in the sense that we trial something, we test a little, we pop a little seedling out into the world, and we have a little look around. And if the conditions are positive, then that continues to grow. If the conditions aren't positive, then that seedling doesn't take off, and then we try something else and we plant something else. Let's just try to be a bit more regenerative and organic, even in the way that we approach businesses, and think of businesses as living entities that are there to also give back to society and to people and to planet. Not to think in an extractive, what can I gain? What can my business get from existing? How can my business itself as an entity grow? I think it's flipping the script. How can my business give back to the planet and help to support people and planet and help to support future generations. That would be my magic wand.
I love it, Nicky, and I have to say I'm not totally surprised by your use of the magic wand. It was sort of as I had expected and hoped, but I love it. I think that there's that whole note that a couple of sort of phrases spring to mind. It's that sense of contribution. What can you take, but what can you contribute as an organization? I think that just sprung to mind, and I think I love this recurring theme that you brought up around experimentation, and you're right, like that is nature's approach, and we as organizations should be looking to approach that too. And perhaps that is what really, really kind of promoting, organizations taking more of an experimental approach to the way that they look to evolve and to innovate, that actually by encouraging that mindset, that might be our tipping point, that if everybody was doing this all at the same time, we would learn lessons far quicker, and we would then be able to share those lessons for everybody else to adopt too. So I think it's a brilliant magic wand suggestion. I enjoy it, and I agree with that one wholeheartedly. Nikki, it's been an absolute joy having you on the Responsible Edge this morning. Thank you so much for persevering with technical issues before we started. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Nicky O'Malley, founder at Nature's Voice, for joining us for the show. Nicky's expertise brought depth to our discussion on the CISL report, Better Business, Rethinking Business Models for Nature Positive Outcomes, which we'll link to in all of our materials. And we particularly looked at the transformative potential of nature positive business models. This episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.